Hey guys, this is Dr. Christopher Huffpower, owner of The Business of Dentistry, the largest dentist-only social media page in the world, where you can go to learn more about how to run your practice well so that it's profitable. So, what you may not know about me is that I'm also a clinical dentist. I began my first practice in 2013 in a little town called Alvin, Texas. I grew that practice until I got to the point where I was having so many patients, I had to go fee for service just to get some rest. Since then, I've purchased a second practice and partnered with MB2. Both of my practices consistently collect over $1.45 million a year. Now, I'd like to share with you one of the ways that I make sure that happens, how I built my practice, and how I communicate with my patients to get them to say yes to large treatment plans. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and delve into something that I call the Dental Sales Playbook. Now, the Dental Sales Playbook is just my name for something that we created in my office. It's a workflow. I believe everything should be systematized, and this is how we systematize sales training. So, I know that sales is a bad word in dentistry, but I think that after we finish talking today, you may have a slightly different idea of why sales is important. Because let's face it, all of our patients deserve great oral health, and it's our job to get them there. Honestly, you might say we have a duty to learn how to sell dentistry. Now, the first thing that we're going to cover is mindset. We're going to delve into the works of Napoleon Hill and his study of over 500 entrepreneurs. We're going to find out what the secrets they had in common are and what the big takeaway is from those secrets. As he said, these 13 secrets can be used to become insanely successful at anything in life. And the reason is they're going to give you the confidence to know that you're going to succeed. The next portion of this, we're going to be talking about the communication formula. Now, the communication formula is just basically a graph that shows you how communication works. The important thing about it is for us to think intentionally about the messages that we're transmitting to our patients and to our team members as well, and how they might understand those messages and how best to craft them so that they understand the message that we intend to send. The next portion that we'll get into is the sales and buying cycle. They're basically just flowcharts of where people are when they're buying something or selling something. If you can figure out where you are and where your patient is, you can meet them at the right place to give them the right information to make great decisions about their oral health care. Next, we're going to cover something that's huge for me, which is from Dr. Robert Cialdini, the author of Influence. It is an amazing book. I urge you to buy it, and I urge you to read it. But we're going to cover some of the major levers of influence that he talks about in the book and how you can apply them to your daily practice. The last portion of this is going to be just me kind of informally going over a couple of tips and tricks that I use in my own practice that I've found great success with. So let's go ahead and get right into it. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, in this first portion on mindset, we're going to talk a little bit about the works of Napoleon Hill. He is considered to be one of the most influential authors whenever it comes to self-help, motivation, and mind training books, particularly whenever it comes to financial topics. I urge you to go out and get this book and read it yourself, but we're going to cover some of the major takeaways from it today. 84 years ago, a journalist named Napoleon Hill studied 500 titans of industry, 500 self-made millionaires over 20 years, and he boiled down their success into 13 steps. Now, there's no mention of money or wealth or finances or stocks within his text. He takes a different approach. He focuses on breaking down how those men believe they attained their own fortunes. And his belief was that they did that by busting through psychological barriers that all of us carry around. I've included a section detailing those 13 steps because I think that many dentists suffer from the same psychological barriers when it comes to case presentation and treatment plan acceptance. I like to joke and call this section Think and Close More Cases. Now, of the 13 principles of success, and mind you, Napoleon Hill said that these 13 principles were absolutely essential if you wanted to attain success in anything, not just grow great wealth. Those principles are desire, faith, autosuggestion, specialized knowledge, imagination, organized planning, decision, persistence, the power of the mastermind, the subconscious mind, the power of the brain, the sixth sense, and transmutation. Let's delve into what each one of those mean according to Napoleon Hill. First, desire. You have to want it. A quote from Napoleon Hill says, "Wishing will not bring success, but desiring success with a state of mind that becomes an obsession, and then planning definite ways and means to acquire success, and backing those plans with persistence, which does not recognize failure, will bring success." In short, if you want it, refuse to believe that there is a world in which you will not get it. So when you're presenting treatment to a patient, always believe that the patient is going to agree to the treatment. Because obviously you've given them the correct treatment, it's best for them, and they should know it. Next, faith. Believe that you can achieve your goal. Success begins in the form of thought. According to Napoleon Hill, the amount is limited only by the person in whose mind the thought is put into motion. Faith removes limitations. Again, you're starting to see a trend here. Believe in what you do and that you can do it, and you'll be successful. Next is autosuggestion. Use affirmations to reach your goal. Turning desire for success into reality requires sending your subconscious mind phrases and mantras that support that goal. You have to repeat it out loud, what it is you want, how you plan to get it, until you become so obsessed with your purpose that it is the main driving force in your life. Be specific. Don't say, "I will make $1 million and put it into savings." Say, "I will make $1 million and put it into savings by January 1st, 2022. By giving your mind that specificity, you can lock onto your goal and you can truly drive toward it to achieve it. A quote from Napoleon Hill says, "Your ability to use the principle of autosuggestion will depend very largely upon your creative capacity and your concentration upon a given desire until that desire becomes a burning obsession." Again, you hear that same mantra. You must become obsessed with the fact that you will succeed in this. You must believe it with all of your body, your being, and your soul. The next thing he talks about is specialized knowledge, and I couldn't agree with him more. Gaining experience and continue learning. An education only becomes powerful and leads to great success when it is organized and applied to life. It must also be continually sought after. You are never done learning. I want you to think about the phrase lifelong learner. I want you to integrate it into your being. I want it to become a part of you. Never stop getting better. Successful men in all callings never stop acquiring specialized knowledge related to their major purpose, business or profession. Those who are not successful usually make the mistake of believing that the knowledge acquired ends when one finishes school. How many of you can really resonate with that? I mean, to me, it strikes me so much as coming directly from his mouth to speak to dentists everywhere. The next principle that he discovered is imagination. Come up with ideas and visualize your success. So it's really kind of two parts. The first is imagination and how you conquer challenges that you meet in attaining your goal. And the other is actually being able to see yourself, visualize yourself being successful. Visualize the change you're going to make in this patient's life for good. And then you can truly begin to believe you can do it. He says, ideas are the products of imagination. Man's only limitation within reason lies in his development and use of his imagination. The next category he talks about is organized planning. Take action. Once you visualize your success, you need to take action and go after exactly what you want. You must act persistently and with enthusiasm. Opportunity has spread its wares before you. Step up in front, select what you want, create a plan, put the plan into action, and follow through with persistence. Most of us are good starters, but we're really, really weak whenever it comes to finishing things. Because, let's face it, we're entrepreneurs and we're technicians. Moreover, people are prone to give up at the first sign of defeat. There is no substitute for persistence. The takeaway here, persistence pays off. Role play and practice your presentation skills every single day until they are like second nature. Then you're going to have the confidence to present with confidence to your patients. The next thing that Napoleon Hill talks about is decision. Defeat procrastination with decisiveness. A key trait that Hill recognized in all the individuals that he studied who had acquired great wealth was decisiveness. Those who settled on decisions quickly know what they want, and they tend to get what they want. A quote from Napoleon Hill says, "People who fail to accumulate success without exception have the habit of reaching decisions, if at all, very slowly, and of changing those decisions quickly and often." In other words, don't be wishy-washy. And this is great whenever it comes specifically to treatment planning and presentation. Don't tell a patient, well, we could do this or we could do that. You could put a bridge there, you could do a partial, we could do nothing. Be decisive and say, hey, these are your options. We could do nothing, we could do a bridge, we can do an implant, we can do a partial. If you don't want something that comes out of your mouth, the partial's out. Let's face it, we wouldn't be having this conversation if you didn't want to do something, and so we'll leave do nothing off the table. So that brings us down to a bridge and to an implant. In your case, I believe that X is the best thing. Be confident, be certain, don't be wishy-washy, and you're going to find that your sales increase exponentially. The next thing that Napoleon Hill talks about is persistence. He's got to persistent about the use of the word persistent, isn't he? Persistence, don't stop until you get what you want. Persistence is crucial whenever you're trying to accumulate wealth or to attain success, and yet very few people possess the willpower required to turn that desire for money or success into actual money or success. Hill writes, "Riches do not respond to wishes. They respond only to definite plans backed by definite desires through constant persistence." The next section is the power of the mastermind. Surround yourself with the best. The most successful people create a mastermind, meaning they surround themselves with talented people and colleagues who not just share their vision, but have achieved success in the ways that they themselves want to achieve success. The alignment of several smart and creative minds is exponentially more powerful than just one alone. Together, we are greater than the sum of our parts. Hill writes, "No individual may have great power without availing himself of the mastermind." Next, Hill writes about the mystery of transmutation. Choose a compatible partner. Now, love is an incredibly powerful human emotion. It creates physical life, it develops emotional life, and when it's harnessed and redirected, it can enhance our creativity, our passion, our enthusiasm, and our persistence, all of which are crucial to accumulating wealth and achieving success in what you wish to do. Think about this. It really is common sense. If you have a partner in life who wishes the same things for you that you wish for yourself, and they're willing to support you in the pursuit of that, you're always going to be more successful. Hill writes, "When driven by this desire, men develop keenness of imagination, courage, willpower, persistence, and creative ability unknown to them previously." One of the final sections that Hill talks about is the subconscious mind. Master positivity and dismiss negative emotions. If you truly want to be rich, you have to plant that desire and then your plan into your subconscious mind. We talked earlier about using mantras, telling yourself that you're going to succeed with something, convincing yourself on deep levels that you not only deserve this, but you're working hard for it and you will succeed no matter what you have to overcome. Hill says the subconscious mind will not remain idle. If you fail to plant desires in your unconscious mind, it will feed upon the thoughts which reach it as a result of your neglect. What that means is, if you haven't made sure that on a deep level you truly believe in your own success and that you're confident that you'll succeed, then you will hear when other people say that you won't, and you'll take it to heart. And it instead will become part of your emotional DNA, and it will drive you away from success. Hill writes about the brain. Associate with other smart people and learn from them. To me, this is really similar to his mastermind notation. And remember, he derived these from 500 different individuals. And so you're seeing the same thing over and over and over again. Be persistent. Believe on a deep level that you will succeed. Make a plan. Know what you desire and go after it. Hill says, don't surround yourself with people who are slothful, lazy, unmotivated, or negative. Their thoughts will rub off on you and cause you to doubt your own abilities. Suppressive spouses can do the same, robbing you of your potential for success. Just like earlier we talked about how if you marry the wrong person and they're not supportive of your goals, they may actually keep you from reaching them. The last thing that Hill talks about is the sixth sense. Trust your gut. He says, through the aid of the sixth sense, you will be warned of impending dangers in time to avoid them and notified of opportunities in time to embrace them. Have you ever had one of your patients that you just knew you shouldn't treat? And you did anyway because you didn't have any good logical reason why you felt the way you felt. They weren't ugly to your team. They weren't dismissive of you. They weren't disrespectful. They seemed to agree with your treatment plan. They seemed eager, but just something deep down inside said, don't treat this patient. For whatever reason, you treated the patient, and it turned into a disaster. I've been there. I know you guys have been there. The next time, listen to your sixth sense or your subconscious and do what it tells you. So what's the takeaway message here? If you believe you can, or if you believe you can't, either way you're right. Great quote by Henry Ford. The truth is, if you want to be good at closing cases, you have to believe that you can do it. You have to have confidence in your ability. And you have to have an unrelenting, obsessive desire to become as good at talking to your patients as you possibly can be. In our next section, we're going to talk about the communication formula. Now, the communication formula is pretty complex, and it's morphed over the years as people have understood greater complexities of how people communicate. We're going to really just brush over this here. We're going to handle it on a very basic level, but I think it's something that you really need to think about whenever we are talking about how to talk to patients and get our message across. Now, communication is a process made up of 4 components. Those components include encoding, the medium of transmission, decoding, and feedback. There's also noise. And noise is the interference with communication that can be caused by either the sender or the receiver themselves based upon their values, their cultural outlook, sex, race, age. There's a lot of things that can go into it, but there's a lot of filters that they place on what we hear and how we hear it. The first step in the communication process or the communication formula is encoding. Now, in this step, the sender is faced with encoding the message using symbols that represent ideas or concepts. This process translates the ideas and concepts into a coded message that can be communicated. The symbols can take on numerous forms, such as languages, words, gestures. These symbols are used to encode the ideas into messages in a way that others can interpret and understand them. Intention is the key when encoding a message. In fact, communication can be described as the process by which intention becomes attention. Therefore, when encoding a message, the sender must begin by deciding what he or she wants to transmit. Now, this decision by the sender is based upon what he or she believes the receiver's knowledge and assumptions to be, along with any additional information that he or she wants the receivers to have. When encoding a message, it is important for the senders to use symbols that are familiar to the intended receiver. A good way for the sender to improve encoding their message is to ask the intended receiver questions about their job, their likes, their hobbies. Not only will this increase the principle of liking, which we'll discuss later on, but it'll also increase your knowledge about the types of things that this person knows about. As an example, you might want to use construction analogies if you're talking to a patient who works for an engineering firm, or as a contractor, or in similar construction-related fields, because those are the types of symbols that they're going to understand. The next thing that we have to consider is the medium of transmission. And to begin transmitting a message, the sender uses some kind of channel called a medium. And this channel is the means by which they convey the message. Most channels are either oral or written, but visual channels are becoming much more common as technology increases, particularly in the dental office. Now, this also includes things like models. Common channels include the telephone, a variety of written forms, memos, letters, reports. The effectiveness of the various channels fluctuates depending on the characteristics of the communication itself. For example, when immediate feedback is necessary, oral communications are much more effective because any uncertainties can be cleared up on the spot. In a situation where the message must be delivered to more than a small group of people, written channels are often more effective. Although in many cases, both written and oral channels, and sometimes even visual channels, can be used to maximize the amount of information that you can send and reliably think might be translated correctly by your audience. Now, a lot of this may not make sense in the terms of talking to patients, but it does whenever you think about speaking to your team. Anytime that you're talking to your team and you're trying to relay a message, a memo is a great way of doing it to make sure everyone is on the same page. Then repeat the memo and have everyone sign it in your morning meetings. It's a great way to make sure everyone is on the same page and that your message has been heard and everyone has an ability to answer questions or ask questions about the new change of policy. Now, if a sender relays a message through an inappropriate channel, the message may not be received by the receiver. And that's why senders have to keep in mind that selecting the appropriate channel will greatly assist in the effectiveness of the receiver's understanding. And for instance, have you ever tried to explain something physical over the phone without using gestures, visual cues, or models, or visualizations on a screen or drawings? It's much more difficult than whenever you have those tools at your disposal. So this is basically just a reminder to make sure that you remember the message you're sending matches the mode of transmission. Now, after an appropriate channel or channels are selected, the message enters decoding stage of the communication formula. Now, decoding is conducted entirely by the receiver. Once the message is received and examined, the stimulus is sent to the brain for interpreting in order to assign some type of meaning to it. Now, it is in this processing stage that our preconceptions, our cultural identity, our personal identity may enter into that decoding process. The receiver begins to interpret the symbols sent by the sender, translating the message into their own set of experiences in order to make symbols meaningful. A successful communication has occurred when the receiver correctly interprets the sender's message. But as we all know, we played that game telephone when we were kids. Oftentimes, the more layers that something has to go through, or in telephone, the more people it has to go through, the less meaning or correct meaning emerges on the other side. Feedback. That's why feedback's important. So, feedback is the final link in the chain of the communication process. After receiving a message, the receiver responds in some way that signals a response to the sender. The signal may take the form of a spoken comment, a long sigh, a written message, a smile, or some other action, or even lack of response is in a sense a form of response. Without feedback, the sender cannot confirm that the receiver has interpreted the message correctly. And I'll go a step further. I think there needs to be feedback on the feedback. So If you tell someone something and they sigh, then you should ask a question about that sigh. So I heard you sighed there. Are you upset about something that was in the message? Are you upset about something I said? Or you should ask them to repeat the message to you. A lot of times you'll see whenever you have someone repeat a message that you have transmitted to them and they don't give you the correct visual or verbal response, when they repeat that message, the words that they use give a different connotation than the words that you used. And so some confusion has happened because you haven't used the correct symbol constructs to get your message across to that specific person. And their cultural or sexual or age filter has caused it to be misconstrued. So, noise. Although the communication process seems simple, it in essence is not. Certain barriers present themselves throughout the process, and those barriers are factors that have a negative impact on the communication process. Some common barriers include the use of inappropriate channel or medium, improper grammar, inflammatory words. And remember, inflammatory words, some people might be upset by something, some people might not. If you're talking to a drill hand, you might say, you screwed that tooth up, buddy. But if you're talking to a little old granny, you might be way safer saying, ma'am, it appears you have a crack. Words that conflict with body language are a serious indicator of confusion. Technical jargon. Guys, we're so guilty of this. We're so guilty of talking dentalese to our patients, and it completely obfuscates meaning. And I use the word obfuscate purposely because some of you aren't going to understand what that means. It makes it to where we don't communicate well and our meaning is lost. And the whole point of communication, remember, is to transmit information from point A to point B as accurately as possible. Noise is a common barrier. Noise can occur during any stage of the process. Noise essentially is anything that distorts the message by interfering with the communication process. It can take many forms, including the radio playing in the background, another person trying to enter into the conversations, any distractions that prevent the receiver from paying attention, or, as I said earlier, our own internal prejudices, both transmitting and receiving. So, George Bernard Shaw is one of my favorites, and he has got the most amazing thing to say on this. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. Without feedback, you never can tell if you've truly communicated what it is that you wish to communicate to your audience. So I know that was a long, drawn-out process to say, think about what you say, think about how your audience is going to hear it, but it's an important step whenever you're trying to convey the information you need to convey to your patient so they can make great decisions about their treatment. Okay, guys, the next thing that we're going to talk about is buying and selling cycles. Now, what are they exactly? So, the selling cycle has 8 steps. Initiation of communication, building agreement and commitments, discovery, patient information, desires, deficits, the things that they have that they feel are problems or don't feel are problems, and that's an important one to remember. Qualifying and disqualifying, can they afford it? Can we finance them? Is it not possible because they have time issues or a vacation is coming up? Present solutions, presenting a comprehensive treatment plan, handling objections, and we're going to talk more about objections in a little bit here. Closing. The case is not accepted until money changes hands. I hear a lot of doctors say I have 80% case acceptance or something like that. And what they really mean is they told the patient what the treatment was and the patient signed the treatment plan, they never did the treatment. That's not case acceptance. Case acceptance is when money changes hands. Your last step in the selling cycle is deliver. Underpromise, over-deliver. Always make sure that your patient's expectations are far lower than what you know you can give them. Super, super important for having both satisfied patients and for your own sanity. The next part of the selling process is handling objections. It's one of the reasons why I included this. Even though the selling process itself is not super important, handling objections is one of the biggest things you need to learn if you're going to close cases. So there are four basic types of objection. There are the valid objection, the confused objection, the invalid objection, and the hidden objection. The next stage of the selling cycle presentation is handling objections. Now, I've included a section just on this because it's really the most important part of the sales cycle so far as the doctor goes. First, the valid objection. An objection that displays both an interest in going forward with the treatment and a valid reason for not being able to do so. These issues are usually involving life circumstances. Dr. Paul Homily gives some great courses on this actually. He calls it fit issues. And what it is time, money, convenience, previous stories from other people about poor outcomes. They may need to talk to their spouse. You may be talking to the wrong person. You might not be talking to the buyer. You might be talking to the person who needs what you have, but not the person who can say yes. So those are different types of valid objections. Now, valid objections are the easiest to solve. All you have to do is be flexible and cooperative and imaginative in finding a solution to the patient's objection, and you're going to close the case. Bring the spouse in for a consult to explain. Arrange for financing for the patient. A lot of times that's the biggest one, is they just don't know how they're going to pay for it. Help them out there. Come in on a day or time that you normally wouldn't have if they have time fit issues, and say, hey, look, I don't usually come in on Fridays, but for you, if you prepay for this case, I will show up on X Friday and I'll take care of it for you so you don't have to worry about missing work. Last, get a patient that has an excellent outcome to answer the questions of a patient who worries about that, and that will reduce their hesitation. And usually just the act of you doing that will show that you truly care about their outcomes and truly care about getting them the best that they can best solution they can possibly have. Obviously, you want to make sure that you've got HIPAA clearance forms. And the way that I do this is I just introduce the patients and I say, Mary, I've talked to you a little bit about us having a patient who had some concerns about a procedure that you had done. I've spoken to Miss Ann over here, and Miss Ann says that she would like to meet you. I'm going to step away. I can't be involved in you exchanging any healthcare information, but if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and Mary, tell Miss Ann about your procedure. And Ann, if you don't mind, ask her any questions that she feels comfortable answering. And I'll just come back whenever you guys call me. Leave the patients alone and allow them to just chat about the procedure. If you've done a truly amazing job with the first patient, the second patient is going to do the treatment. I mean, your previous patients are your best selling strategies. Super important to remember, you must ask and have both patients sign a piece of paper that says they're okay with being introduced as a patient of yours. Otherwise, you have a HIPAA concern. Okay, the next type of objection is a confused objection. This kind of objection comes in two flavors, okay? The objection when something has been misunderstood by a patient. Now, usually the patient will not raise an objection if this is the case. It is up to the person presenting treatment to notice that they appear confused. Pay attention to their body language, their facial expressions. If there's a sudden drop in interest, those can all indicate confusion. Now, in this instance, ask the patient to explain what you have told them so far. Listen carefully to the words that they're using. Now, remember, we talked about this earlier in the communication section. If they don't use words that mean the same thing, they may have a misunderstanding of the words that you used. It's important at that point to define all of the words that you used in your explanation to them. Remember, you want to use analogies and symbols that they can relate with and easily understand. Now, the next type is an objection when something has been misunderstood by the seller. Now, this occurs when the seller has either misunderstood what the buyer is saying because there's a language barrier or there is a word choice barrier. You don't agree on the definition of a word, for instance. Patient is using it incorrectly. Or many times because we're distracted and we're simply not listening well. We'll see mistakenly that the patient seems to have an objection, and we'll try to handle that objection. And you'll find yourself in kind of an awkward position then, because the patient's going to say, well, that wasn't a concern for me. In these instances, it is always best to apologize to them and just tell them that you misunderstood and thank them for being understanding of your misunderstanding. Always own it. The next type of objection is the invalid objection. Now, an invalid objection is actually an attempt to stall or escape. The third type of objection is the invalid objection. An invalid objection is an attempt to stall or escape. The patient just wants out of there. This patient is closing down lines of communication left and right, which seem like reasonable excuses to delay the conversation. It's usually a weak attempt to avoid making a decision. The patient probably has received so much information, they're confused about something, they feel overloaded, they just want to get out of the situation so they don't have to make a decision. You have to learn to recognize these. A lot of times the body language will give it away. The patient will appear fidgety, or they'll play with their hands, or they'll grasp and ungrasp their purse. There's a lot of little signs, and once you see enough of these and you recognize them, you'll start connecting those signs. It really is an art form, learning to read people's physical language. So the first thing you want to do here is think about a case there where there's another patient who has a similar circumstance. Sometimes whenever you tell someone a story that is someone else's story, but it's enough like their own, that'll reopen the lines of communication. First, though, you have to let the patient know that you're listening. Now, this is particularly effective whenever the story is as close as possible to the patient's own, because this invokes the liking principle, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So, for example, Doctor, I really want to hear more about getting those feelings, but honestly, I'm so busy right now with the kids and school vacation. Let's talk about it after the summer. Often in a case like this, positioning for both a scarcity offer and a social proof or liking offer can close the case. Now, this is particularly true if the patient can be easily financed for the full amount on the spot. Here's an example. Miss Mullins, I hear you. Summers can be crazy. I had another patient who had the same exact problem last summer. She had to put a filling off because they were taking a trip, and one of her kids got sick. Man, it was a mess. It seemed like something was always happening. The universe was trying to keep us apart, and she just couldn't get in to get her work done. By the time she could, the tooth that it had originally needed filling, it had abscessed, and now it needed a root canal and a crown instead. If it would help you to keep from going through that, I am happy to be flexible with my schedule to make sure that you can get in here before the summer is over and before it gets too crazy. We can even see if we can get this financed so the money won't even be a concern. You can pay it out over time. Would that help? Now, after asking, will that help, you're going to want to be quiet for at least 30 seconds or until the patient responds. And we'll get into that a little bit later. The last type of objection is called the hidden objection. Now, if an objection persists, the buyer keeps repeating it, no matter how illogical it is, and for some reason no solution that you offer the patient seems to solve their problem, or if you're met with a string of objections and the patient just back to back gives you reasons why they can't do it, and the buyer shows a distinct lack of interest in hearing any solutions to any of the objections that they've raised, then you can be absolutely certain that you are dealing with something called a hidden objection. These are the hardest objections to handle because often they're the result of something that's embarrassing to the patient, embarrassing information, or they're just ashamed to admit something. It requires great skill in communication to breach the social defenses in a way that allows the buyer to be comfortable telling you what their true objection is. Now, I can suggest a couple of techniques here. One is to switch presenters. Sometimes just due to some preconceived notion. Remember we talked earlier in communication about how all of us strain each message through our own background and beliefs? Well, sometimes one of these preconceived notions of the buyer simply makes them uncomfortable telling you the objection. Now, it might be age, race, sex, etc. They can all play a role in this. And think of an instance where an older woman is being told by a younger man, or vice versa, an older man being told by a younger woman that they have all of these things wrong. And that younger person is in a position of authority and a position of knowledge. Some older folks find it very difficult and uncomfortable to be treated by someone who's much, much younger than them. Sometimes even bringing in a hygienist or an assistant who's older, or your front office manager who's older, or front desk, can really calm the situation down, and the objection will magically disappear. It's tough to call those though. The next technique that I suggest that you use is the direct approach. Just ask what the real objection is. And explain what you've noticed and tell them that you just want to be helpful and help them solve their problem. But you can't do that without knowing what it really is. Now be careful here. This one can backfire big time because some people will be upset thinking you're calling them a liar. So you don't want to get in that situation. Like I said, on this one, just be careful. The next technique is not going to be one you want to hear. It's just let it go. Now, this can be really hard to do. Sometimes, though, you just won't be able to help people because they aren't ready, and that's okay. So the next thing we're going to get into is the buying cycle. Now, the selling cycle was what the person who's presenting treatment is going through as they're presenting treatment. The buying cycle are the stages that the buyer goes through whenever they are actually purchasing something. So in the buying cycle, we have awareness of need, seeking options, assessment of potential risks, deciding on the best option, taking action, and then achieving their victory. Awareness of need is knowing that they have a problem that needs solving. I cannot stress how big a deal this is. If you have someone who does not know that they have a problem or does not own that problem, and you begin to educate them on different solutions to solve it, you will never close that case and you will never help that patient. Paying attention to where your patient is in the buying cycle is of paramount importance if you want to be successful in sales. The next step is seeking opinions or options. During this step, the patient used to come to the dentist to ask what to do. Now they have other options. They may research online. They may ask their friends and family. They may go and read your reviews. They're going to research options, not just ways to treat what they know they have as a problem, but also who to treat it. Now, during this stage, your job is really simple, and it is frankly in the wheelhouse of every dentist out there because we tend to fall into this role naturally and sometimes to our detriment. Educate the patient. This is it, folks. This is when you get to show off how much you know and speak doctorese as long as you break that doctorese into plain language that your patient can understand. Remember, use symbols that they can associate with. This is also a great time, by the way, to ask for referrals. Once you've presented them with solutions or options to solve their problem and they feel comfortable, you've actually given them a gift of your knowledge, particularly if this is a free consult. This is a perfect time to ask for a referral. The next stage is assessment of potential risks. Now, every single treatment, we have these consent forms, and they tell all these potential risks. What your patient wants to know about truly is pain, expense, convenience, and time. Talk to them about those things, and you can help to reduce their anxiety. Reassure the patient and cooperate with them in problem solving. For instance, I suggested earlier being flexible in times that you can come in if it'll help to close a larger case. Now, I don't suggest that you do this if you've got a buccal pit filling on number 31. That person can wait until you have an opening in your normal schedule. But if you have a full mouth restoration that you need to get started on, by all means, come in on a Saturday morning if you have to. Buy your team donuts. Heck, take them all out to Denny's or whatever they want. But be flexible to help solve the patient's problem, and you will earn a patient for life. The next is to create a financial agreement. During their assessment of potential risks, it's important to a lot of patients to know how much money it's going to cost, when it's going to cost that money. So in this instance, it's often a really good idea to run a soft credit check on the patient to find out how much they can finance. then to look at your range of options that you plan on presenting to the patient so that you can give them a ballpark of the most or the least that it will cost. Remember, always estimate over the least and over the most. That way, no matter what, you're going to come in within your range. You never want to underquote a patient. They will remember that forever. Our next step here goes right hand in hand with the first step, and that is to offer financing options. The next stage that a patient goes through in the buying cycle is to decide on the best option. Remain open and approachable to answer follow-up questions, but during this time, this is the patient's time to think. If you've done a great job presenting the case, you've educated them correctly, and you've dug out all of the objections that they have, and you've handled them, then you don't have to worry. The patient's going to make the right decision. Just remember, the right decision for the patient is not always the decision you want them to make. Next, take action. This is when you close the case. If the patient doesn't agree to treatment and begin treatment the day that you speak to them, you should call them the next day and ask them if they've had a chance to talk to their spouse. Then call them in either 3 days or when the patient says that they want to be called, or when they say they'll call you back. If they don't, you call them the next day or have your team call them. Now, it's important sometimes, I would say on the second call or third call, for the dentist to be the one who calls the patients, because it's likely there's an objection that hasn't been handled if by the first time you contact them, they're not ready to close the case, particularly if they're financeable. So keep that in mind. Now, when they close the case, it's very important to communicate to them that they've made a good decision. If you've done your job as a clinician and you've explained the treatment plan well enough, and it's a comprehensive treatment plan, then all of the options you gave them are good and valid options. This is where you give your patients kudos. If she picked a denture over implants, she picked the right thing for her. Here's what you say. Ms. Smith, I think you're making a great decision here. I know that there are other options that might be right now out of your price range, but getting something done about this is absolutely the right thing to do. Any way that we can help, we'll do that. Okay, this is also a great time for you to ask for referrals. Why? Well, you have just gotten a commitment, a huge commitment from this patient. And we're going to talk a little bit later in the influence section about what commitments mean and why you want to stack as many commitments on top of each other as possible. But the commitment that you've just gotten from the patient when they hand over their money to begin treatment, because remember, a case is not closed until money changes hands. When they've done that, they have just written out a huge referral to you in the form of dollar bills that says, I believe that you are a great and competent dentist, and I trust you to take care of me, my family, and my problems. What better vote could you have from a patient before you ask them for a referral? Ms. Smith, I'm so glad we're going to be able to get this taken care of for you, and I'm really thankful that you have given us your trust and that we're going to be able to go forward with this for you. If you know anyone else who has similar issues or similar problems or just needs a good dentist in general, please send them our way. We make our living from happy patients like you, so we'd really appreciate it. Okay, so that wasn't salesy, that wasn't too pushy. A lot of us, we worry about being too pushy, and rightly so. Nobody wants to be a used car salesman. Now, the last thing here is achieve victory. Now, some people ask me whenever I talk about this, what is victory? Later, I'll talk a little bit more about this, but anytime that you're explaining treatment to a patient, it should be a story. It shouldn't just be a bunch of itemized procedures on a paper with dollar signs next to them. It's a story. And most well done, the story will be their story. Not yours as the doctor, not about your skill. It's about the patient, the things that they're overcoming, and their victory at the end, where they get their happy ending. Help the patient celebrate that victory. Recognize that journey, and then ask for referrals. Buyers enter the selling cycle at different positions within the buying cycle, okay? Someone may be in the assessment of potential risks portion of the buying cycle. They may have already done all their research. They are coming in just to find out if you can do an all-on 4 and if they're a candidate, because that is what they want, because they've done the research and they didn't need you. Okay, that's fine. You have to meet them there. You don't want to jump back and explain all their options to them. You do, and you legally have to. But you want to say, okay, well, I understand that you already know this, but legally I got to say there's these other options, and you're not interested in those. Is that correct? Fantastic. Okay, so let's talk about the option that you have chosen and whether or not you're a candidate. And then we get into the potential risks of how much is this going to cost? Is it going to be painful? How much time is it going to be? You know, is it going to be convenient for me to get done? So remember, buyers enter the selling cycle at different positions within the buying cycle. Determine where your buyer is during the discovery portion of the selling cycle. Super important. If you don't do that, you will never close a single sale. Well, except for maybe by luck. The next is when the buyer is unaware of a need, they are not a buyer. If a person refuses to own the problem, don't try to sell them on it. Educate them on the need. Convince them the need is theirs. Use stories. But don't try to sell something to someone who doesn't believe they have a problem. Never do it. Next is always acknowledge your patient's objections. You will be very, very surprised that sometimes they just want to feel heard. And that's enough to dispel objections and to close the case. I actually remember one case in particular that my associate was working on. And the woman came in and she wanted one of her lateral incisors to be pulled. And the reason is that it stuck out and she hated it and she bit her lip on it all the time. And she was angry and she was hostile toward my team. And I asked her, I said, hey, what's going on here? Because I kind of heard a little bit of snippiness whenever I was walking past. I introduced myself and I said, hey, I'm Dr. Huffpower. I heard you sounded a little bit upset. Talk to me about what's going on. And she said, this tooth right here, I want it extracted. I want it done today. It's been bothering me for years. I bite my lip on it and no one will listen to me. And I can see like she's got tears welling up in her eyes. So I sat down and held her hand. I said, darling, tell me about it. How long has this been happening? Okay, what kind of options have people offered you in the past? It came out that she had just left her dentist. Like, just left him. He was down the street. She came to my practice to get another exam because she wanted a second opinion. And the reason is when she told the dentist that she wanted that tooth extracted, and she'd been a patient of his for years and had been telling him for years that the tooth bothered her, he just told her, no, I'm not going to do that. That would be malpractice. So I nodded and I said, did you know that we have the ability to move that tooth to where it needs to be? And the color just kind of drained from her face because she was all flush, and she squeezed my hand and she said, you can do that? I said, sure. You're not too old for orthodontics and we don't even have to put those wired train tracks in your teeth anymore. We closed that case that day to get that Invisalign done because we listened to the patient and she felt heard. And because she felt heard, remember she was very combative before? She didn't want to hear options because no one had told her that they heard her. Super important, guys. Please make sure you're doing this in your practice. Every sale has 5 obstacles. No need, no money, no hurry, no desire, and no trust. If you can handle those 5 objections, you're going to be a case closing genius. Okay, guys, this is probably one of my favorite parts of the entire presentation, and that is The Psychology of Persuasion. Book called Influence by Robert Cialdini. Right now, we're going to talk about the 6 levers of influence. Reciprocity is by far the most important. So what is reciprocity? Reciprocity means we don't like to feel as if we owe someone something. Generally speaking, If you have a social obligation, you tend to want to settle them as quickly as possible. And so you don't feel as if you've got something hanging over your head. Let's say, for instance, somebody invites you to a party. Well, the next Halloween, you might invite them to a party because you want to feel as if you're over that social obligation. And let's face it, you'd feel a little bit guilty, even if you didn't give into it, you'd feel guilty not inviting them to your party. That is part of the function of reciprocity. It's possible to use this desire for reciprocity to influence others. To do this, you have to act first, and you have to give them a personalized and unexpected gift. Now, to some extent, the value of the gift doesn't even matter. It can be 50 cents, it can be $50. In fact, they found that the value between $1 and $50 really is negligible in the amount of reciprocity that it creates in the receiver. Now, reciprocity is the reason that waiters leave a mint with your bill. Studies have shown that tips left by patrons increase a great deal, 20 to 25%, if a single mint is left. You leave more than that, and you do it in a special and unique way that makes that customer feel special, and the tips can increase up to 80% just for leaving a couple of mints. In the dental office, we screw this up. We do it completely wrong. I mean, think about it. Every single time your patient comes in, you give them a gift. It's the same gift every single time, and you give it after the entire appointment's taken place. Absolute wrong place to do it. So if you're going to be giving your patients goodie bags, I'm going to have some suggestions for you. Give them goodie bags before the appointment. Also get some random swag. Chapsticks, water bottles, pin with lanyards, blankets, and t-shirts. They all work well. Brand them with your logo. By the way, I like pins with lanyards on them because ladies will wear them on their necks instead of putting them in their purse because the lanyard gets tangled. And that means your branding is front and center instead of hid inside their bag. Because, I mean, let's face it, you're putting your name on there because you want advertising. Now, you're going to notice that your adult fluoride treatments and your case acceptance in general are going to go up a lot just by making that one change to doing this before the appointments. And the reason for that is you have created a sense of reciprocity in the patient. They feel as if you have given them a gift and now they owe you something. And so they're much more likely to make commitments to you than they would have otherwise been. Now, another way of doing this is getting a card, because remember, the price of the gift is relatively inexpensive. So if you get a set of like 6 or 7 different types of cards and you rotate them every couple of months so that the patient doesn't get the same card every time. And it's just like sweet little sayings or something that says how much you appreciate them. Have the whole team sign it and give it to them on their way in. You're going to notice a huge difference in your ability to close sales. Again, that is reciprocity. Now, the next thing that we're going to concentrate on the next one of the levers of social influence that we're going to concentrate on is liking. Now, liking might seem totally obvious, but people are much more likely to be influenced and persuaded by people they like than by those that they don't. Let that sink in. I know it's earth-shattering, but it's true. People are also much more likely to like people who are similar to them than people who are not. Now, to use this principle, you simply need to become liked by those around you and those that you're looking to persuade or influence. You can do this by cooperating with others, by paying them genuine compliments, identifying similarities, and building relationships. The key here, though, is that you need to build those relationships and garner this liking before you try to influence them. And if you try and become liked once you've begun your efforts to influence them, they will backfire because it will be seen as disingenuous. Now, one of the most productive ways to build liking is to ask about the patient's likes and their hobbies and their job and their family. and actually care when you're asking. If they speak a different language, ask them how to say something simple like hello or thank you in their language. Write these down in their charts and use them at the patient's next visit in your office. Even if you mispronounce the word, and trust me, I've done that hundreds of times, you're going to earn a lot of credibility with the patient, a lot in the liking department. Pay the patient genuine compliments. Notice things. Miss Miller, did you get some new shoes? Is that a new hairdo? The point here is paying attention to the patients as if you like them and listening to them as if you care. Be genuine, authentic. Be nice. People will like you. As a side note here, I always try to find at least one thing that I like or admire about a patient that I'm talking to. I try to keep that in my mind for the entire time that I'm talking to them, because you're going to have a better, more upbeat, happier, friendly tone. A word to the wise: if you're trying and you can't find a single thing that you like about a patient, don't treat them. It always ends badly. The next thing that we're going to talk about is social proof. We've got a little 5-star sheet up there that people use to make decisions. The truth is, online reviews matter. Consensus are social proof. In general, humans are social by nature, and they generally feel that it's important to conform to the norms of a social group. Now that means that when it comes to decision making, they often look to those around them to see what others are doing before making up their mind. We also do the same when we're confronted by a difficult decision. Now, we'll often look at reviews for a good product or service as a shortcut. You might decide to purchase it because it's got 5,000 5-star reviews. It's probably pretty good. A classic example of this is when many people go to a hotel, they'll see a sign that says, 8 out of 10 of our hotel guests choose to reuse their towels. Why do they leave this sign? Well, it's because they were trying to cut costs, and they did studies on social influence, and they found that if they put up a sign that said, people like you, basically, do this, that people would start not laundering their towels. And it was very, very successful. It's far more successful at influencing, persuading than signs that just say simply reuse your towel and it helps the environment. Interestingly enough, they've begun to move to an even more savvy social proof request. 8 out of 10 hotel guests who stay in this room choose to reuse their towels. And they found it is stupendously more successful even than the 8 out of 10 hotel guests choose to reuse their towels model. And why is that? It's because of social proof, and it's because of liking as well, because they've stacked those two levers of influence. People who are like you as possible, and lots of other people do this. So consider that whenever you're creating your messages for your patients, whenever you're treatment planning them. Tell your patients what success and happiness your other patients just like them have had with treatments that they're considering. Another great technique is to learn the most common objections to treatment plans and to make videos of your patients explaining how they had the same concern and found that it was not warranted. I did this in my own practice. Everyone in our practice signs a media waiver the minute that they walk through the door. And if they don't, there's a big mark in their chart so that I know that we can't do anything with them media-wise. Just an example, just something we do. One objection that I see a lot is a concern about pain from extractions and injections. I had one patient who was raving in my chair one day about how gentle I was after I extracted her tooth. I had her give me a testimonial saying how gentle the injection was and how it didn't hurt even after the tooth was out. Again, in cases like this, having that media release signed in the patient's chart in their intake forms will allow you to take spontaneous videos of these moments, and these really are priceless moments for helping other patients overcome their fears, doubts, concerns, and objections. The next thing that we're going to talk about is authority. Now, we as dentists have kind of a heads up in this because, we are known as an authority. Authorities are individuals who are authoritative, credible, knowledgeable experts in their field, and they're more influential and persuasive than those who are not. Part of the reason of this is that authority and credibility are some of the core building blocks of trust. When we trust people, we are more likely to follow their advice. Now, we see the principle of authority in life in many walks of life. Dentists with white coats are used to sell us toothpaste, right? Airline staff wear uniforms to remind us of their authority. And many email signatures are appended with a string of credentials and qualifications in an effort to increase that individual's authority. In reality, it's less effective when individuals promote their own brilliance and authority than when others do it for them. Interestingly, though, it almost doesn't matter who the person is, even if the person promoting you is known to benefit from it personally. Their words of praise still increase your ability to persuade. Now, using diplomas, credentials, awards, CE certificates, and articles that you've written as decorations in your office can go a long way to building your own authority. Wearing a white coat when first meeting a patient, having a team member introduce you to the doctor, etc. Now, interesting thing about the white coat, it doesn't matter after the first time you meet them. And so you don't have to wear it every single time. Just maybe keep a consult coat on whenever you walk into the room. There are great ways to build your authority in your patient's eyes. Remember, just because something isn't impressive to you doesn't mean it doesn't impress the patient. One of the biggest problems I had whenever I was beginning as a dentist was this stupid desire to create commercials or advertisements that would appeal to me. Well, I'm the worst person to appeal to. I'm not exactly trying to, get a whole office full of dentists to come treat. I want the regular people around my practice. The next principle of influence that we're going to cover is scarcity. Now, the less of something there is, the more people tend to want it. It holds true for experiences as well as material products. There's not really much more about this to say. You've seen it in your daily life. From a persuasion and influence perspective, this means that to increase interest in your product or service, you may benefit from reducing its availability, or at least creating a sense of scarcity. For example, online sales platforms or hotels or airplanes commonly say things like only 5 seats or 5 rooms are left available at this price. Now, they do this to create a sense of scarcity as well as urgency to add time pressure, because urgency is closely related to scarcity. Now, in the consumer goods arena, firms do this on things like limited edition versions of products. And they do this for products ranging from hand soaps to shoes, adding increased scarcity by limiting the availability and thus increasing the value of the thing that they're selling. Now, in the dental office, a well-known way to create scarcity is to offer only 2 appointment times when an appointment is called. Miss Smith, would you prefer a morning or afternoon appointment? Afternoon, great. Do you prefer 2 p.m. on Wednesday or 1 p.m. on Friday? This technique can be used to fit patients into those hard to fill spots on the schedule. I actually advise dentists to use this technique first and fill those spots first because, frankly, they're the hardest spots to fill, and then the rest of your schedule is much, much easier to deal with. Another way that you can use scarcity. For the slow months, September and October, create coupon cards for $100 off of the price of a crown. Create only 10 of them. Have your receptionist call your patients who have a crown scheduled or a crown on their treatment plan that they haven't scheduled for yet. Tell them that the coupons are first come, first served basis and they must be used this month, and that they must pick up the coupon in person at the office and prepay for the visit if they'd like to take advantage of this limited time offer. And then watch your chairs fill up. Commitment and consistency. There is a reason why 68 million people go to McDonald's every single day, even though they only boast a customer satisfaction rating of 70%. And that is because their food may only be mediocre, but you will receive the same exact experience ordering it and eating it at any of their 14,000 US locations. In short, people like consistency. They like consistency in their food, their experiences, and particularly with their identity or sense of self-image. In other words, If I'm a person who thinks of myself as a healthy person, then I'm more likely to undertake actions that I consider to be healthy actions. From a persuasive and influencive perspective, this means that if I can convince you to act in a minor way relating to something, then you will think to yourself as that type of person. And you'll be more likely to act in that way again in the future. You'll also be more likely to increase your actions in that direction if I suggest that you do so. Now, commitments add together to become agreement and personal identity. If asked to do a small thing, each time a patient is asked to do something of the same kind, they are more likely to do so, to remain consistent. Eventually, these small commitments become agreements and then actions. For example, if you're my boss and I first get you to agree that generally speaking, some flexibility in working patterns is a good thing, well, then you're much more likely to agree whenever I propose a 4-day work week when I eventually ask for it. In practice, this lever of influence can be used by asking the patient binary questions. Are you an A or are you a B? Do you generally do X or Y? Then present them with requests that reinforce this stated type. Each type that they reinforce this identity, they will be more likely to agree to the next request to do so again. Here's an example. Miss Smith, are you the kind of person who likes to maintain your teeth? Or are you the type of person who only fixes things when they become too painful to bear? Now, I chose those word symbols, right, very carefully, because the message I want to send is that it's a good thing to be the kind of person who repairs their teeth and keeps them in good repair, and a bad thing if they want to just let things go to hell in a handbasket and come in pain. So another example would be, Mr. Smith, do you prefer spending money to maintain your belongings, or are you more likely to repair and replace them when they break? Same question asked in a little bit of a different way. Even though it's not dental related, Mr. Smith has identified himself as a maintainer, not a repairer of broken things. And once he does that, he will try to remain consistent to that same thing for every single commitment he's asked to make. No matter what a patient answers, though, you found out a little bit more about them. I mean, Miss Jones may decide that she's the kind of patient who comes in when the pain's unbearable, and that's okay. Empathize with their answer, even if you don't agree with it. After all, it is their mouth and it's their decision. Now, this will get you big points in the liking department, and it will also reinforce the patient's feeling of autonomy. It's a great quote from Robert Cialdini himself. A well-known principle of human behavior says that when we ask someone to do us a favor, we will be more successful if we provide a reason. People simply like to have reasons for what they do. Well, guys, thank you for giving me some of your time. There's going to be a bonus section that follows this that has me talking about some of the tips, techniques, and tricks that I use in my practice to close cases, and just some things to reinforce some of the stuff that we've talked about here. It was previously recorded for another continuing education course that I did, and if you're interested in that course as well, we go into much more depth about the principles of influence, and that would be at doctorsedge.com or docsedge.com. If you need to get in touch with me, you can go to www.dockhoffinvestments.com or email me at dockhoffinvestments@gmail.com. Thank you again for your time. Hey guys, this is Doc Huffpower again, and this is our final video in my portion of this educational series. So I know that all the other videos have been pretty long, but as you're aware now, I'm sure, the principles of influence take a long time to cover, and they're very, very important for increasing your case acceptance in your practice. And I don't want to put you through that again, but I do want to give you some quick tips. So, first thing, I want you guys to get a couple of books. The first one is Exactly What to Say, The Magic Words for Influence and Impact. Fantastic book. You're going to recognize a lot that we talk about in this section comes from that book. The next one is Building Your Story Brand. I know I spoke about this one in one of our mastermind sessions. It's a wonderful book, and I think you're going to get a lot out of it. In the first part of this series, I asked you a question, and that was, why selling? And I explained that we have a moral obligation to ensure that our patients receive the best treatment plan for their problems, and that we provide them the best possible service. The question I didn't ask you to think about is, why buying? Why do people buy? We talked about how people use their emotions to make decisions. But what emotions are they tapping into? One of the most famous studies ever done, it's referenced everywhere, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And a lot of work has been done on explaining exactly how that influences, or how those hardwired instincts influence our buying behaviors. And what we found is that almost all people buy for one of three reasons. And if you think about this, you can even apply it to the things that you've done and the reasons that you buy. The first is pain. Pain is actually the strongest motivator for buying. The second is fear of loss. Now, some people dispute the fact that fear of loss and pain are different. They say that fear is just fear of pain, because in some level, if you're losing something, there is pain involved there. But I think fear of loss is better separated, and so I'm going to present it that way. And the last reason that people buy is for potential reward. Now, because of the fact that on the very base of Maslow's hierarchy, that's where hunger and all of our needs are, including the need to be without pain, including the need to be safe. And so pain is the absolute biggest motivator whenever it comes to buying. The second highest motivation is fear, and very, very far distant, in fact, I believe it's 2 levels up on Maslow's pyramid, is desire for reward or seeking reward. Now, if you think about this in your daily practice, it's really a no-brainer. A person who comes in, who has an abscess, they're hurting, they're going to buy that day. And if they're not, you definitely need to work on what you're doing to present your cases. But 9 out of 10 times, if someone comes in pain, they're looking for a solution right now, unless you're a drug seeker. If someone comes in and they're concerned about something, how many times have you heard, I lost a filling and I want to get it fixed today? In my office, it's constant. So the lower you are on that triangle, the lower you're on that pyramid, the more likely the patient is going to buy, because they're already super, super motivated, because those are our driving forces. Now, higher up on the pyramid, let's say seeking reward, you're going to have a lot more resistance, a lot more time that they're going to want to think about it, and a lot more time they're going to consider, because when they're looking at gaining a reward, they're also looking at monetary loss. And so if you can separate that monetary loss, or their fears of the shortcomings of the reward, or their fears of not being satisfied with the reward, then you can definitely move your buyer closer to saying yes. I hope that makes sense so far. Now that you understand why people make a decision to buy something, what moves them to action, we can kind of begin to work on how those emotions play out and what we can do to guide your patient down the path toward choosing the treatment that you believe is most appropriate for them. I want you to think about these words. Just imagine. And how would you feel if? Now, both of these words can move a patient toward fear or toward reward. Okay? So imagine being able to eat the foods that you want to eat when you want to eat them. Imagine that freedom. So when you use the word imagine, it turns our brains on. They light up, and our little story reel begins to spin. And so the patients begin imagining and visualizing, and hopefully you guys understand the importance of visualization. They begin visualizing that outcome, what I like to call their victory. And so after I do that, and I say imagine that, and said, Is that the victory you were hoping for when you came in today? So we've now painted this picture with our patient as the hero of this story. They're King Arthur. We're just Merlin. We're going to point to where the sword is, and they can pull the sword out of the stone, and they get to be king of the land, right? We are a facilitator of their happiness. Now, if you think about that, it's a very true statement. So, the next set of words I want you to think about is, how would you feel if? Okay? So, we're actually giving them permission to use their emotions in this decision whenever we use that phrase. So I want you to think about this. We're going to go up and we're going to go down. How would you feel if you could smile without worrying that your dentures would fall out? How would you feel if you never had to worry about being embarrassed because of them again? Okay. For a patient who's in a denture and who wants implants, that is a powerful motivator, okay? And it's important to understand the meaning of words. Motivation. Motive-ation. Reason to move. The word literally means reason to move, a reason to act. So we're giving our patient a reason to act. Now I want you to think about it from the opposite direction. How would you feel if, in let's say 3 years, your teeth are all gone? You won't be able to eat the foods that you love anymore. You won't be able to smile or talk with confidence anymore without worrying what people were thinking when they saw your mouth. I want to avoid that for you. So why don't we talk a little bit about what I can do to help to get you from here to where you need to be. Okay, you may notice I used to pause on the end of that. One of the techniques that I use a lot is pausing after giving a call to action, okay? A lot of us, we overtalk our own call to action. And I think it's because we don't recognize it for what it is. We don't realize that I've just asked the patient to make a commitment, okay? Now, we talked earlier in the section on consistency and commitments, how important small agreements are to be stacked on top of each other, all right? And small reciprocities to be stacked on top of each other. So we want to make sure we utilize that by giving a pause, giving the patient time to consider that there has been a question asked. And the pause, in fact, itself is an interrogatory. It says, hey, there's silence here. You need to fill it, because we don't like silence. Now, I want you to practice on your family. I want you to role play this. How about this one? So, I saw that the dishes in the sink were full. Now, let's be honest. How long did it take for me just being quiet for you actually to start feel a little uncomfortable, you know? You want to feel that silence. You want something there. And if the other person isn't going to feel it, you are going to. Now, there's an old adage that says the first person to talk loses. I don't know that it's about that. I think what it's about is breaking down your patient's internal barriers, because they all have them up, right? These are conversations they don't want to have. So whenever you leave a big bucket of silence there, they're going to fill it with something. And so they're going to start talking. And once they start talking, you're building rapport. So anyway, absolutely magic. Use the gift of silence. The next thing I want to talk to you guys about is 3 options. Patients want autonomy. And if you remember, we talked about autonomy increasing liking, right? So if patients want autonomy, and you're looking in their mouth and there is a grenade that went off in there or something, and you know exactly what needs to happen, the best way to approach this is to tell the patient, look, there are a whole lot of different ways to fix your problems and to get you healthy. But the way that I see it, you have three best options. May I explain those to you? Okay. Now you're taking a little bit of a risk there because you're asking a permissive question and you're giving it as a simple yes or no. And so they say no, well, you're going to have to go digging. You're going to have to find out why they said no because they have an objection to something. If they say yes, you've just reached a commitment. So you have a small agreement on the table, and that means that you're building rapport. Okay? So the way I see it, Mr. Smith, you have three options. Now, whenever you present these options, first of all, make sure they are the three options and three viable options. I want you to present the first option and the third option being your least favorable options, and the middle option being the one that you want the patient to choose. Okay? So whenever we're presented with information and we're presented with two sets of information, we tend to remember the last piece of information given to us more than the first piece. And there have been countless studies on this, even down to physical pain or a feeling of hot and cold or what have you. The last piece of information we get, or the last input or stimulus we get, is what we remember most. And so what you've done is you have given truthful information about these three options for the patient. And you've guided them toward the one that you believe is the right fit for their needs, for their wallet, and for their desires. And the way you've done that is by presenting the most favorable information first and the most unfavorable last for the options that you really don't think fit them. And you presented the option that you do want them to choose with the bad information first and the good information last. Just a little technique. It works fantastically. Now, the next part of that technique is the sandwiching effect, right? So you may remember that we talked about the effect of comparing two things. How whenever you compare two to three things, you amplify the distance between them. And so in this case, not only are we showing them this contrast effect of the very, very high price and the very, very low price, because mentally we actually have this bracket where once something is a certain price, we consider it to be quality. If it's a higher price, we consider it to be something that is overly expensive. And if it's a very low price, we consider it to be cheap and undesirable. And so what you're doing is you're actually setting up the middle price to be the thing that your patient sees as, by contrast to the others, the acceptable price that they're going to want to pay, or that seems reasonable for them to pay. The other thing that you're doing here is people tend to pick the middle option of almost everything when they're unsure. And so if you have something at this extreme and you have something at this extreme, and you set what you want in the center of those two things, our little cheat in our brain says, pick the middle one. So we're reinforcing pick the middle one by also setting it up as the price that we're creating in their mind as the reasonable price in contrast to the other two. Now, bonus for a combination of a little bit more advanced technique, you can use that same contrast effect by using the imagine and how would you feel if comments together. So you first create a floor with the how would you feel if, and then you use imagine, and that actually amplifies the distance between those two things, which causes the reward in imagine to seem that much greater by comparison than if it was used alone. Okay, so I'm going to do this for you now, and you can see what it looks like all put together. As far as I see it, you've got only three options here. If we try to repair your teeth, I don't feel good about us having a great outcome, and I certainly couldn't guarantee it would work. I think that we've reached the point at which we really need to extract them. So I believe that the best option for you would be a hybrid denture. Now, the good things about those is that hybrid denture, it screws into implants in your head, so it's not like a denture that normally just comes out. And it really really is life-changing. It works very well. Now, the bad about that is that it's a very time-consuming process. It's going to take a long time to get done correctly, and it's rather expensive. Our next option is a denture that is removable, but it snaps into place on implants. Now, the bad thing about that is that it's not going to screw into your head so you can't take it out. But the good news is it's easier to clean, and it's a lot less costly than the first option. Now, finally, the last option I'll present to you is just a pair of conventional dentures. Now, the great news is they're relatively quick to get done. Depending upon how we do it, we can have a set of teeth for you the same day that we take the teeth out. And honestly, it's the least expensive of all the options. Now, the bad thing is that you're probably going to feel like it's the worst decision you've ever made in your life, because dentures are hard. They're just not a real replacement for teeth. They're a replacement for not having teeth. And I hope you understand the difference there. They fall out at the most inopportune times when you're laughing or smiling or eating. They don't chew well, but it's better than not having teeth at all. So, what are your thoughts? Okay, now your patient is going to feel the silence there, right? They're going to start talking about different things. Just listen to them. Let them ramble for a little bit. And almost always they're going to ask you, well, what do you think? And here's where you look like the good guy, all right? And I did this for years when I worked at Service Merchandise. I was the youngest manager in the history of Service Merchandise. And for those of you that are not old like me, that's a store that no longer exists. But that wasn't my fault, I promise. So what I would do is I would line up 3 treadmill models, and I would point to the expensive one and talk about all the features, and then I'd talk about the price. Then I would point to the middle one, and I'd talk about the price first, and then I'd talk about all the features. And then the last one, I would talk about all the features, and I'd talk about the price. And then I would talk about how many we had returned to the store because the belt breaks or what have you. All honest, all truthful. And that's the big thing about these stories that you tell these patients. They have to be truthful. We had a couple of our members of the coaching session that asked for very specific things to be covered in this technique video. So the first is overcoming financial objections to treatment plan acceptance. So guys, whenever you're talking to your patients, it's important that you understand how the consumer mind works these days. They think in monthly payments. They don't think in big numbers. And so big numbers scare them. You first present the treatment plan in the form of a monthly payment, and then have some great third-party financing options available for your patients. I'm going to suggest a couple of them right now. One is Ally. Ally Bank does a great job. I believe they can finance up to $35,000, and they can finance down to a 558, although 558 is uncommon. Depends upon their debt to income ratio. So whenever you're looking at these things, you have to remember that just because a patient has a great credit score doesn't mean they're going to get financed, because their debt to income ratio might be too big. The next one I'm going to suggest is United Medical Credit. United Medical Credit can finance up to $15,000, and they can, I believe it's a 520 that they can finance down to. They have actually what they call a waterfall system, where the patient drops into the system at the top. It does a soft credit check at a bunch of different banks, and it finds the lender that is going to lend them the most money that actually accepted them as a lendee. And so that's a really, really nice one. And the last one I'm going to talk to you guys about involves you taking a little bit of risk, and that is compassionate finance. Now, I use them in my office. I was worried and nervous about it whenever I first started using them. I think I've only had 2 patients default since the beginning, and I kind of thought those patients were going to default anyway. Now, they tell you at Compassionate Finance that they want you, and by the way, I have no financial interest in compassionate finance. At least not currently. They may sponsor us or something in the future, but I currently do not have any. They will usually tell you to take 20% down. I always recommend 30% because at 30%, you can do almost anything and cover your lab fees, cover your labor, and basically your cost of goods sold. So you want to make sure you have that covered so that the only thing you're taking a chance on is the actual profit above and beyond operating costs, because you never want to risk that. Now, here's the nice part. Taking that chance on the patient also comes with all that interest that they would normally being paid to the bank, being paid to you, which you split with compassionate finance. Closing the case in the operatory. Now, I'm going to go against what a lot of people have to say here. If a case is under $5,000, I close it in the operatory. If it's over $5,000, I always close it in the consult room. One of the things that was asked in the group is, how do you present an ideal treatment plan without sounding salesy? And you don't want to sound salesy. You may recall I talked about a Gallup poll that was recently done, and salesman is the least trusted profession in the United States. They even come in under congressmen and senators, not that far, because those are number 2 and number 3 least trusted. But definitely you don't want to come off sounding like a car salesman. As long as when you're trying to sell to a patient, your heart is in the right place, which is you're trying to help the patient, that comes through. People will listen if you show them that you genuinely care about them. So, as a for instance, Mr. Smith, I'm really sorry that your mouth has gotten to this point. Between the periodontal disease and the broken teeth that we're seeing here and the abscesses, fixing your teeth and repairing them back to a point approaching where they're as good as new would be very, very costly. And it's definitely an option that we can explore. It really just depends on your budget, because my job as the doctor is to find the place where your budget intersects with what you need and what you want. And so I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about what your goals are for your own oral health, and it's going to allow me to formulate a much, much better plan for you. Okay, so I have 5 rules that I always follow. It's kind of, remember we talked about codes early on in this presentation? Well, this is kind of my code of trust and integrity in the sales process. The first is always have the patient's best interest at heart. Always. The next is always provide a comprehensive treatment plan. Everyone deserves that. I don't care if you don't think they can afford it. And let me tell you, many people will surprise you. I had a chicken farmer who pulled out $50,000 out of their pocket in big bills because they were ready to get a denture with some implants. So always, always, always present comprehensive treatment. It's good for you. It's good for the patient. Always, the patient must have autonomy. You have got to allow your patient the freedom to choose. Next, under promise and over deliver. Cannot say that enough. Under promise, over deliver. And last, good works well publicized. If you're going to do something for this patient and you're going to give them a price cut, it needs to be on the bill that way. People forget what you've done for them unless there's a commitment, written, signed commitment. Remember about that? So when you do decide to give someone a discount to help them out, or you give them a package deal, first you print out every single line item, and then you have a separate sheet that details what the package deal is. And then you have something on the bottom that you write savings, and you put a big number, our gift to you. So those are my 5 rules for trust and integrity in the sales process. Use them and you will never come off sounding like a used car salesman.